Hello there. This presentation is going to be a bit of a walkthrough on how to read a piece of scholarship in the social sciences. And what we're going to talk about today is really going to draw on what I discussed in class the other day. So I would like you to have your notes handy along the way. I think I will be asking you specifically to write things down because really the goal is that with this lesson in mind and then maybe some opportunities to practice the strategies we're going to talk about in class, um, you should be able to then have a plan of attack when you find sources to read and ultimately use in your annotated bibliography. These journal articles, these pieces of professional scholarship, as you well know, are super difficult to read and make sense of, primarily because you know you are just not at a point in your academic career where you are an expert, and these things are written for other experts, for other scholars in the field. So it is really necessary to walk into these articles with some good reading strategies. So step one, I think, for reading an article in the social sciences is to pay careful attention to the title. Um, and obviously the title of our article is what we see right here. I'm going to try to highlight it. So please write this down. Step one, study the title. Here our title is going to set up a couple things. I'm going to look for these keywords here in the title. So we've got emotion, dysregulation, and coping drinking motives. Remember I said in class earlier that social scientists are typically going to be a little skeptical of causes, one thing causing another thing, but instead what they're going to be looking for is connections, linkages, some things helping us predict other things. And often the title is going to set that up. So here, the two things that are being studied and linked together is going to be emotion dysregulation and coping drinking motives. And if we just pause for a second, I think what we can see is that these key terms in the title um, are going to be seemingly really complicated to understand, but also maybe not. Certainly, this term coping drinking motives is something I think that we can maybe make some sense of, and maybe we don't fully understand it yet. We'd have to potentially read the article itself fully, but we've got drinking motives, obviously reasons why people drink, and then coping. Um, so we've got drinking to cope with something, whether that's stress or anxiety or tragedy or something. The drinking motive would be to cope. Okay, so that's one of the key things that this article is dealing with. It's trying to link to something else. And then though we've got this other term here, and we're going to maybe just kind of put that on the back burner here, but we really do, in order to kind of get what this um, article is going to be about, we do truly need to understand what is meant by this term emotion dysregulation. There's no way that you yourself could know what that means, or me either, by the way. But usefully, our excuse me, our authors, Messman, Moore, and Ward here, they're going to be defining that, and so now we just need to be on the lookout for it, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But step one is, as I said, going to be to study the title. So by doing that, we've got two key things here, right? The things that are going to be studied and linked together in this article. But then importantly too, the title also tells us the specific population or group of people that is being studied. Remember, social scientists study human behavior, and in this case, it is the behavior of college women in particular. So we don't know everything we need to know about the article by studying the title, but I would like to pitch to you that we already know a lot simply by studying the title. Strategy number 2, write this down please. Study the abstract. Now, articles in social sciences are almost always, I'd say 99% of them, before the article itself begins, and so that's what we got going on down here. Before the article itself begins, there's going to be this little synopsis, this little summary or preview of the article. It's called the abstract, and the abstract is really just it's a resource for readers. The abstract is written by the authors, and its only purpose is to lay out for the reader the key pieces of information that the reader needs. And abstracts are always going to follow the same basic format. And so if you understand what the abstract conveys and in what order, then you're going to really, I think, be able to walk into the article itself with a pretty solid understanding of what to expect. I chose an article that actually identifies the key components of the abstract. Many abstracts do not, but they will almost always follow the same pattern. So the first thing, as it says right here, that we're going to be on the lookout for in an abstract is going to be the objectives of the study or the purpose of the study, what the authors were trying to set out to do. So here it says pretty clearly that their purpose in this was to examine emotion dysregulation as a predictor of coping drinking motives, alcohol consumption, and alcohol-related problems among college women. Now again, that sounds pretty complicated, but let's just slow down and break it down. What they want to do is they want to see if this thing, emotion dysregulation, which we don't even know what that is yet, but just be patient. If this thing, emotion dysregulation, predicts these other behaviors. And remember what I said in class is that social scientists are looking to see if some things help us predict other things, or if some things are connected in some way to other things. So here, if this thing, emotion dysregulation, helps predict drinking to cope, alcohol consumption in general, and any sort of problems that are associated with alcohol among college women. So that's what they want to study. Seems pretty simple. Abstracts are always going to devote a sentence or two to explaining what the research method was. And so here you're going to see things potentially about surveys, about questionnaires, about observations. You're almost always going to see a number in here. That's the number of participants. And then you're going to obviously see specific reference to the group itself. In this case, college women. So just to kind of review before we move forward, an abstract, the first sentence or two is almost always going to talk about the objective or the purpose of the study. The next is going to be a sentence or two about the methods. Then the authors are going to summarize or provide a short synopsis of the results, what they found. And this is going to be probably often a very challenging set of sentences. But if you, like we have done before already, just kind of slow down and just extract from it what you can. Again, you just have some information about the article before you sit down and try to read it. So here what we see is structural equation models suggest an indirect relationship between emotion dysregulation and alcohol variables. So first of all, I don't think we know what structural equation models are. That's probably a fancy statistics term. It sort of just doesn't matter. What's important is that this manipulation of the data that they found ends up suggesting a relationship between two of the things they were studying. It's an indirect relationship, but they did find a relationship. In the next sentence, emotion dysregulation predicted. So it did, in fact, help them predict the coping motives for drinking, and the drinking motives themselves then predicted what kinds of problems the people would have. So here in these sentences, what they're explaining is that they found that the one thing did predict the other thing. So those sort of linkages are in fact there. Finally, an abstract is going to end, by providing what here they're calling conclusions, but we could maybe also think about as like, what next, or what can we do with this? So here they're saying that in college women, interventions which target emotion dysregulation may indirectly reduce alcohol consumption and alcohol-related problems via a decrease in coping drinking motives. So, after having done all of this study and finding these results, what the writers are saying here in the abstract is that for this population of people, college women, interventions, so maybe that's like programs or something, but things that we can do to get involved that target emotion dysregulation may indirectly reduce alcohol consumption. So I don't know, maybe they'll say something different, but I can imagine. So if you are a college administrator or a counselor or something, and you administer to a group of college women some sort of survey that potentially measures this emotion dysregulation, and they score a certain number that's kind of within kind of a warning zone, that you may want to try to meet up with those students who get that score on the emotion dysregulation scale, because if you can kind of help those out, then you may be able to reduce some of these alcohol related problems, right? Because we know, or what they found is that emotion dysregulation ends up predicting these behaviors. So here what they're saying is that maybe what should be done with this is that we can act on this, right? We can find or target young women who have this emotion dysregulation so that we can help them out. So we don't know everything about everything yet, but we walk into this article having not even read one word of it really. We know the things that are being studied to link together. We've done that by reading the title and what population this is studying. By reading the abstract, we understand a little bit more clearly what the authors were trying to do, how they went about doing it, what they found, and what, in their view, we should people should be doing with the information found in the study. Just as a reminder, not all abstracts are going to be breaking down the sentences in these useful little categories. Many, in fact, won't, but all abstracts are going to follow the same basic pattern. Sentences or two at the beginning that talk about objectives. Next are a couple sentences about methods. After that, results. After that, conclusions. So if you become a very good, savvy reader of the abstract, you are going to really have a lot of information about the article before you even read it. Unfortunately, though, as a writer, you can't really use the abstract in the paper that you're writing. You can't quote from the abstract. That's just not done. So you do need to read the article. But what's important here is now to kind of understand what order is going to happen here in the article. I'm not sure I said that correctly, but let me pause and reorient myself here. Yes. These articles are going to basically follow the same basic pattern over and over again, and it's the pattern that is basically reflected in the abstract here. So the beginning of the paper, as we talked about in class, it's going to be, something like an introduction. There's going to be different sections in it, but here, the writers are going to kind of set up some context here. So we have some early paragraphs that are going to be just about, what we know about drinking and its outcomes, the rise of dangerous drinking patterns among college women, a lot of just kind of contextual information. But here, though, I want you to see or remember that if you want to know what this term emotion dysregulation means, then the place you're going to look for it is in the introduction of the paper, because it is there that the writers are almost always going to be defining their key terms. And so that is maybe now strategy number 3, is to survey the introduction for information you need to know. So please write that down. Survey or review the introduction for information you need to know. I want to know what emotion dysregulation means. I feel like I need to know that. And I am reasonably confident it is here in the introduction. I maybe want to feel like I know it before I start digging into these paragraphs. So I'm just going to see if some of these sections end up helping me find what I'm looking for. So I see a section called Drinking to Cope with Negative Effect. Okay, well, that actually maybe reading that section will help me know more about coping drinking motives. It's clearly going to be in there somewhere, drinking to cope. But I'm scrolling down because I'm looking for emotional dysregulation, and here's a section that begins emotion regulation. All right, so I know it's going to be in here somewhere, and I'm just scanning. Okay, well, there it is, right there. So there's a sentence with my key term, and now then it's just a matter of reading the sentences leading up to it, and I'm going to have a pretty clear sense, as best I can at least, of what emotion dysregulation means. This section obviously tells me that the hypotheses that the writers are working with are going to be outlined here. That might be useful to know. But again, I haven't really sat down to read anything yet. I'm just orienting myself, but I already, having kind of a sense of what I want to be looking for, what I need to know, what they tried to do, what they found, what they think we should do with that information, and then just kind of looking at these um, section headings by just kind of surveying or reviewing the introduction. I just know where things are now. You know, I know what I'm looking for. I got a plan. Hope all this makes sense. So, um, a few more words now. So let me see here. The methods stuff, you know, for our purposes as kind of amateurs or beginners in this in these fields, I'm just not sure how much we can really get or extract from the methods. Like if you were a real expert and you wanted to just really kind of give this article some close scrutiny and really kind of test to see if the results are worthwhile or meaningful. I mean, maybe you dig into this and see if the researchers had some limitations in their research design or whatever. I just don't know that any of us is capable of doing that. So maybe, you know, really for the method stuff, while we're just, you know, kind of amateurs now still, you know, just knowing how many of what type of person and how the information was derived. So by a survey or something. I think that's probably, you know, really all you need to do. Um, but here also in this methods section, know that they're describing their measures, right? So there is, as I suspected earlier, kind of like a scale, right? A way to measure emotion dysregulation. And so if we were to read this closely, you know, a certain scale or a certain score on this emotion dysregulation scale might mean something, you know, but that's basically how they go about it. And oh, so there's also a coping drinking motives scale. But this is basically, I guess, you know, with a survey, kind of a way of scoring that survey so that you can then see, okay, well, a person who scored high on emotion dysregulation maybe also scored high in coping drinking motives. So there's a link. It helps us predict the thing. So every article is going to have an introduction. It's going to then move to the methods section. Then there's going to be the results. And the results is just going to be really, really difficult reading. I would recommend not trying to crush your soul getting through this because already you can just see that um, there's just so much specialized stuff going on here. I mean, standard deviations, this is a term I've heard, but I don't know what in the hell that is, you know, and there's just, I mean, stuff here that we don't know. Microfit indices and theoretical salience and M plus versions, and you just, I mean, so I don't know. I wouldn't worry too much about this. Um, if you did want to dig into this, I guess my 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 best suggestion would be to focus on the beginnings and the ends of the paragraphs and see if you can see in these beginnings and ends of the paragraphs any of those words that might kind of cue you into some sort of finding, right? So if you see the word predicted, or if you see the word correlated, or if you see, you know, a word like that, then maybe that's a sentence you just want to slow down and look at to see if maybe, okay, now here's where I can like kind of pull a quote that says this thing predicted this other thing. But in general, the results section is going to contain a lot of stuff that most of us are probably just not quite ready to understand even. So maybe just breeze through it. But here, where we get to discussion, um, I'm thinking that this is really going to be a pretty important part of the piece here, because now the writers are going to be sitting here and discussing the results of their study. Um, and so I would really focus a lot of my attention on reading this, because again, the goal of any of this, the goal of reading the article, the goal of ultimately then using it in some sort of paper, is to establish what the results of the study were, to establish what these writers found. And you're not going to do that by talking about chi-squares and t-values and standard deviations. You're going to do it by using sentences from this section, the discussion section. You're also going to be, you know, needing to use sentences where they talk about, you know, what future studies might want to do, what additional studies are needed in order to accomplish. Right? I didn't know that that's what they did. I just knew that as I was talking and sort of glancing at this section, I wanted to look for words like future studies and additional studies and what to do next and next steps. And so there I just sort of scanned them and found them. So what we're talking about here, what I've tried to review, and again I did it pretty briefly, we're going to practice this much more in class, but what I tried to review here were just some simple strategies that you could bring to bear with every article that you ever find in the social sciences. Begin by studying the title. The title is going to help. It's not going to solve all of our problems here, but it's going to give us some information. From there, slow down, study the abstract that is going to set up a bunch of key important things. With that done, understand the basic pattern that every article employs. The introduction, followed by the methods, followed by the results, followed by a discussion and conclusions, and to know what to be looking for in each section. If you need to understand key terms, I need to know emotion dysregulation, it's going to be in this introduction. And I don't need to maybe even read the introduction yet. What I might need to do is just study these section headings. And so here in this emotion regulation section, I feel pretty confident that the definition for emotion dysregulation is going to be there, and holy shit, I found it. Want to know their hypotheses? It's going to be here in the introduction. If you want to know more about how they did what they did, if that's meaningful to you, that's going to be in the methods. Using the subject headings here to kind of orient yourself. The results section, like I said, this is pretty heady stuff, so maybe just taking a quick glance at that before now spending a significant amount of time studying the discussion, which is where much of the good stuff is going to be. Sometimes the article is going to call this a conclusion, sometimes it's going to call it a discussion, sometimes it's going to call it something else, but you'll know that it's the group of paragraphs that's going to be following all of this statistical mumbo jumbo. That's where they sit down and really try to explain things. They're going to tell you what they found and what it all means. They're going to tell you what future studies need to do. They're going to tell you what people need to do in order to act on the information they found. So I haven't even read this article yet, but I now feel like I can sit down and do a good job of it without killing myself, without getting frustrated and throwing this thing across the room. I have a plan. So I know I went through this quickly, but I really want you to use and practice this strategy. It's going to really be useful to you. All right, peace.